very good job.
Again, thank you all for being here today. We are blessed to have Buzz Kilgore with us to share some about the history of this church and this sanctuary. He shared with me in the parlor some of his background, and it kind of boggles the mind, honestly, the things he's been, intricately involved with. He's not originally from Virginia, but has spent a better part of his adult life here. He's a VCU graduate. His degree, you said, is in business. Is that correct?
Business
and finance.
Finance.
Business and finance, but he's, despite that educational background, he pretty much started the state community college system. He's headed the Henrico County school system, and for the last 20 years of his working life, owned and managed a architectural engineering firm, even though he's not an architect or an engineer. How you pull that off, I'm still not sure. But anyway, we're blessed to have him with us today and to share his involvement in what you see before you today. So let's welcome Buzz Kilgore.
Let me start out by saying thank you for inviting Joy and I here today. I'm going to ramble a little bit today, so I hope you put up with an old man. This memory is not what it used to be.
People are telling me they can't hear you.
They can't hear me, huh?
So Tom's going to turn on the sound system, and I'm going to give you a microphone.
Everybody turn off your hearing aids. I grabbed this in the front.
Who said that?
If it's like most people with microphones in churches or in auditoriums, they can't find them. Can you hear me better now? I realize I'm talking to a bunch of deaf people like I am. I have a very warm place in my heart for this place. And I may become emotional at times. I spent a great deal of time in this sanctuary before it was changed and before it is where it is today and how we got here. But I think I told you all, if you will please, someplace in your time in this church, pick up a copy of this. Tommy got me a copy. Can you hear me a little better now?
It may not be on yet. He's getting it set up.
This book, I didn't realize until Tom gave me a copy of it about a week and a half ago, and I went back through it, the history of this church. It's unbelievable. It started with a handful of people in the back of a drugstore or a storage room way back in the 1800s. Now, if you think about history today, to where that church started and where we are today, you marvel at the works of God and what has really happened here. Can you all hear me now? Better? Okay. My career has been kind of crazy, as he told you. I started out, well, I ended up, when I came here, before I came here, came out of the Army, which a great many of the older members remember the Army days. But you learned a lot in the Army that you didn't learn it anyplace else. I joined with Joy, which she was already a member, Lakeside Presbyterian Church. In the early part of that, my membership there, I was asked with another gentleman by the name of Sherwood Foster, who was no longer with us, quite an athlete at University of Richmond, because they were trying to get younger men in to serve as officers in the church. I was very young, and I was asked if I would become an elder. Now, that was a big undertaking for me to even consider, but I graciously said, all right, I'll try. Those were the days now which none of you, or probably very few of you all remember, when we had elders and officers who had lifetime appointments. We had an elder at Lakeside called Mr. Bill, and Mr. Bill ran the place. And the first meeting that Sherwood and I ever went to, and I'm digressing all over the place, so be patient with me. We went in, they had 2 chairs, and they told us where we sat. And Mr. Bill said, "Those are the chairs you all sit in. You don't need to say anything. When we need you, we'll call on you." Those were the end messages. I don't think I was ever called. In 1966, we became a member of this church. We moved because Russell Proctor, who was, many of you all grew up with Mr. Proctor. He was kind of like the senior elder. He came to visit Joy and I one Sunday, and we were not happy at Lakeside at the time, and he said, "Why don't you come join us?" We met Matt McGowan, who was then the pastor, and became members here at the turning of that year, 1966, and remained here until, let's see, I was tail end of, can't remember who the pastor was. Oh, John Myers. That time I had moved my business to South Richmond. You remember when we moved our office to Chester, and we moved our home on the river, on the south side of the James River. I was traveling back and forth at night to meetings. I finally said, I'm doing enough running as it is with all of this community college stuff and everything else going on. I need to kind of settle down and be quiet for a while. So we didn't belong to a church for a while. We then joined River Road and been members there ever since. So I'm going to stop right there and just talk about a little bit about the history of this church. I've put pictures up here on the table, the communion table, of what the sanctuary looked like back then and what it looks like today. We were fortunate in those early years. There was a lot of conversation that when this sanctuary was built, it wasn't built the way that a lot of the older members wanted. It wanted to go back to the more colonial meeting house, gather around the elements of the church. We hired an architect during those early years. The committee was formed to start looking at this. Do we want to really change the sanctuary? There was pros and cons about the thing, even among the members of the committee. And finally, one night, the good Lord blessed the committee, and they decided, let's do this, let's take it to the congregation. And we did in a congregational meeting, and it was passed to do this. The cost at that point was about $130,000 to $140,000. Actually, it was $112,000 to redo the things we wanted to do. We were fortunate to find an architect in Charlottesville who knew church liturgy. There weren't many of them around that really understood the elements and the things that were important in the church, but it was important to the older members. They wanted to go back, in their mind, to where they wanted the church to look, and that was a center chapel down the middle. And so we brought this architect in, and I sat and talked with him. I remember the first time. He said, you remember one thing when we're doing all this design and the changing. There are 3 elements. The communion table, okay, the baptism font, and the spoken word. That's what it's all about. We design around those 3 things. Well, then they're talking about, can we go to the round? Can't do anything with a round in here. So he then came back with sketches saying, I can do it in pods to kind of put us in this element of being in the round. So that's what we have today. There were many changes made to it at that point. And how are we going to get there? The committee also was involved very deeply with the basement. Now, the basement in this church has created problems ever since the beginning. And I kind of smell when I come through the back door, it still has problems. Let's understand a little bit about why churches often in this area and north of here end up with problems with basements. Number one, where the committee sits down to decide how are we going to design this, how much money are we going to spend. The last thing they look at is about the basement. We want to put it inside the sanctuary. And that's the last thing we want to be looking at. Because Lakeside, there's all kinds of churches that I've looked at over the years that have problems with moisture in the basement. River Road does, it smells. They've gotten rid of a lot of it, but it's still there. We are on a strata in here on soil conditions. I had a partner, Jimmy Witt, who wrote a book on the soil conditions within Richmond. What have we got? Churchill, you got a tunnel up there, okay? If you come back down Broad Street and into the lower part of the city, there's a pool at the bottom of the old mosque. And underneath that, down 100 and some feet, when we did the business building, we did what we call caissons. We drilled into an underground river back there that's bigger than the James. So there's moisture all over. And we're sitting on what is called blue marl hard pan. And how many times have you designed of that stuff? And it's difficult. And when these churches were built, no one ever said, well, we really ought to spend time on how much money we're going to spend on the drainage system around it. Lakeside Presbyterian sits with its basement below a stream bed. That's how far it's down. It's always had water problem. That's the problem here. You can't get the water out. So that's a little bit of how that committee started. It started out by studying I was with Bill Cooper. You all remember Bill Cooper?
Yes.
Bill Cooper and I studied and had people brought in here to figure out if we could do anything about the basement. We found a firm that would trench around and try to get the moisture out of this building. I don't think we were very successful. It was for a while, but then what do you have now? I don't know, are you using the basement at all?
We do use it some, yes.
Okay. That's a little history of that. From that, we started back into the building, this part. And from that, I think there were 5 or 6 of us on the committee. Frank Rennie, you all remember Frank Rennie? Russell Proctor. In fact, Russell passed away in this church, on the back hall, one after him. You had Lynn Ward. You had, well, I can't remember who your long-term clerk of the session was, Al Lobb. And it was another member, I can't remember who it was. We met numerous hours with the architect trying to figure out, okay, how can we do this? We can't shut down the services. We finished up the basement. It smelled pretty good down there then. We had all that water out of it. And so at that point, we decided, well, if we're going to do this, we need to take it to the congregation. And we did. And it was voted on at that point, $100-some thousand estimated cost to redo the sanctuary. And this was the final on the design of what we would do. Now, no one in the city of Richmond had ever designed anything like this. So we were kind of the talk of town among Presbytery about those people are kind of crazy over there. We did it, everybody fell in love with it. We didn't get it in the round, but we came around the sacraments. That's what we were trying to achieve. So from there, the whole thing started. Now, I'm going to talk about, if you allow me to, for a few minutes about the things inside the sanctuary. How did they end up the way they are? Okay, let's talk about the paint first. We were going to colonial design. What was colonial? If you look at the colors that used in Williamsburg, there were a whole chart of colors that we used. This is not what the original, but we used a paint called Governor Palace Tan. Now, the reason that we went to that was because all of these wing coats underneath these windows had to be taken out because we did not meet state standards for closing dampers if there was a fire at the lower level of the church. So we were trying to meet the requirements of the state and the county of Henrico. So we removed a lot of those. So when we removed them, we changed them. So that up there, all those new banisters across there, was all redesigned under the new design. And it was done, we were fortunate in those days. There was an old mill up on Church Hill called Beckstoffers. And they really did beautiful work in the city of Richmond with colonial design. All right, what are we going to do here? We're going to design a building with beautiful woodwork in it. And what are we going to do like most churches? And I looked at a lot of them. We're going to paint it white. What happens? You'll lose the beauty of the wood. And that was a great concern of the committee, is if we paint this place white, all this woodwork, it's just going to kind of blend in, and no one will see the beauty of the woodwork within the building. So what I did one Sunday is actually the week before that, I got the contractor to come in here and paint some panels. Okay, pulpit stand wasn't here, didn't exist. So I said, paint. I gave him 3 colors, paint some of these panels. You know where I went to finally get final approval? I went to the women's Bible class. My daddy told me a lot of things, but don't cross the women. We went and got the women. One Sunday I went up there and I said, come with me. We walked down here into the sanctuary and I said, okay, look around at these panels. And they all did. And I said, okay, would you prefer to have them white or do you want them that color or that color? They picked one called Governor Palace Tan. Now that doesn't mean a lot to you, but at that time, with those panels painted those colors, really showed the woodwork, and that's what you were trying to do. The colonial design, trying to come back to beautiful woodwork within the sanctuary. And if you go to Williamsburg, look in the old church down there. What do you see? The beauty of the wood, and that's what you're trying to accomplish. And so at that point, we picked the paint colors. Now, a lot of people in the city of Richmond, in Presbyterian, they thought we'd lost our mind. You're going to paint it a color, not a white. We don't do that in churches. Silent. I worked with a Baptist church one time that told me, no, I said, the thing is going to be so large when you get finished, you got to have a pipe organ. Your amps will be, we don't put pipe organs in churches, in Baptist churches. I said, oh, you'll never hear anything in here then. So there's a history behind almost everything we do when it comes to church design. But the colors were extremely important to us in those days. Okay, let's just go through the sanctuary and understand. We weren't able to do much of it. The original thing of Linton Ward, who was head of the pipe organ committee, was we wanted to put some of the things dealing with the instrumentation and all in that balcony. Balcony could not handle it, so therefore we came back down here. The organ itself was ordered and was built by Whole Cape, I think it is, out of Cleveland, Ohio. And Linton Ward, who was at that time on the committee and an elder, really kind of mothered that whole project alone by himself. Each member of the committee was responsible for some sort of importance that dealt with the design of this. So we moved everything downstairs. Everything was done then in this little small sanctuary basement. The services were held down there. Now, then comes the problem, what we do with all those pews. You can't come in here and tear this place up and be full of pews, because we didn't want to have to buy new pews. We had an elder at that time, he's been passed a long time now, and Tallmans. The Tallman family were very instrumental in this congregation at that time. Jake Tallman came to me one day and said, tell you what, I'll bring over the semi-tractor trailers from my business, I'll park the trailers. Do you all remember when we parked the trailers across over here? And the men were asked to come along with a lot of Jake's people, and we took everything out of here. It was totally empty. We took all the pews out, stored them in the back of those tractor trailers, and that's where they stayed during construction. We were very fortunate in those days to hire a firm by the name of Davis and Spires. They were an old line contractor in Richmond who really appreciated good colonial design and were great craftsmen. Okay. The sconces that are on the wall, we didn't have sconces back in those days. And I can't remember, and I looked up through my records, I couldn't find it, who paid for the sconces. We delegated certain things within that period of time to members of the committee to go talk to families. At that time, we had a fair amount of money in this church from families, old families. So the members of the committee would go and sit down and talk and say, if we broke this down into this wall, the sconces, how much they cost, would you be willing to put the money up as a separate gift? I don't know if any of you all remember that. Yvonne, you remember when we were doing that kind of thing? Okay. So it was just small gifts. Many people gave more than small gifts and paid for a lot of things that took place in here. What happens? We didn't have those chandeliers in here then. Do you know where those chandeliers came from? They came from Belgium. And when we started looking at that, the architect went down with me to Richmond Lighting. And we picked out these. These were made in Belgium. Then we get down close to the final point where we had to get these put in. There was some kind of dock problem in Belgium. And we ended up going to Washington and getting help from the politicians to get them shipped, and they were shipped in here. The original, Tommy, where are you? Tommy said he used to sit in church as a boy, young boy, and look up at the old ones. Said, I hope one of them doesn't fall on my head. Anyway, that story. Miss Tallman called me one day and said, how much do the chandeliers that you all want to put in cost? And I don't remember the cost because I couldn't find it in my records. But she said, Mr. Tallman and I will pay for them.
I do remember that.
Now that was a very expensive gift, very expensive. We had members who gave big chunks of money to the organ and a lot of other things in here, because what we did, each member of that committee would go and sit down with people. We had contractors and members here who would say, I'll tell you what I'll do. I will give you so much money, and if you let me do these panels in here. And that's how we came up with money. We were short at that point, and really kind of, Tina and I, we went to the bankers and said, what if we extend the mortgage? We finally came to an agreement on the committee with Session that if we didn't come up with enough money to finish it up, that we would extend the mortgage 3 years. In the end, we did extend it a little bit, but not much, and we paid it off within a year and a half. So the church, when it was opened, was all paid for. Everything was paid for. Okay, I've covered the sconces. I've covered a lot about that organ. The organ itself was not what Len Ward wanted in the end. He wanted a few more stops in it. And how many of you all, you're never satisfied with what you get. You want something else. In the end, how many of you all have listened to organ music out of the big cathedrals? They have a certain tone in the bass of those, that when they bring the organ up, it moves you. You know you're in the presence of God. You're in God's house. We lacked one of those stops. They couldn't afford to get it. And I don't think you have it now. But if you have a large organ that has the big stops, bass stops, when they bring that organ up, you know you're in God's house. And that's what Lord wanted, and he didn't quite get there. The organ itself was a huge change in the church. Because I think prior to that, if you were involved in music, I think all we had was a small instrument organ, and I think is that right?
Yeah.
And we went to a pipe organ. which was a huge change, huge change. The moving of all of this woodwork you see in here, the pews and all, was a major undertaking. And the men of the church were to be complimented along with a lot of the help from Jake Tolman's firm of truck drivers coming in here at night and in the late afternoons and going out the front door with pews. They all had to be disconnected from the floor. Okay, we're down now and we're in pretty good shape. We've organized how we want this sanctuary to look like. We've got the woodwork taken care of by Beckstoffer, a contractor that was just outstanding for us because they stayed with us and with the architect almost daily. They were in here. They were working in here all the time. All right, now, this. It had been just, a bit of it had been designed, but he hadn't finished everything. So then he presented that to the committee. We changed, I think, 3 times in the design of this. Now this is real Williamsburg. This is early, real early in the church. So where do you get somebody? Nobody in Center Richmond could build this in that, not that like this. One afternoon I get a call from the architect, and he's excited. He said, "I found him." And I said, "What do you mean you found him?" He said, "I found a craftsman that can make that." And I said, "Well, tell me about it." He said, "He's in the Valley of Virginia. He works for a lumber mill. He does craftsman work, and he does it in the back of his chicken coop on his farm." Well, needless to say, I was very apprehensive. I called the committee together and I said, "This is what we got. We don't have any else." And so the architect went up, sat down, met with him, and did all the other things. Now, you have to understand, if you look at this, what we call the belly and the cupola, sounding board, that's all craftsman work. It has to be sweated. That means the wood has got to be wet, and then it's got to be steamed, and it's got to be bent. And that's laborious work. An old man went to work on that thing, and needless to say, we were very apprehensive what this was going to look like when we got it. They came down one Saturday afternoon in 3 truckloads and brought this. They brought it in and laid it on the floor. Now, I must admit, we were stunned that much beautiful craftsmanship could be created in the back of a chicken coop. But he did it. And the contractor was thrilled to death because we were all in wonder, who's going to really build this thing? How's it going to look when we finish up? Are we going to really be disappointed, or is God's people going to be happy with what we have? And we were very happy with what we had, because in the weeks that came, again, it was installed. There's 2 rails behind the canopy holding it up in there. And at that point, everyone began to really see this formulating. Then the canopy went up, the sounding board went in. Even though it wasn't painted, even though it wasn't finished, everybody could envision what this was going to look like. Now let's talk about the tablets. These were always windows like they are there. They had to come out, or it was not going to fit with the new design of the pulpit stand. So they came out, and then what do you do with them? I remember the morning we were standing here, and we had taken everything out, and the contractor said, "Well, we can cut panels, plywood panels, to close in those windows, but they're just going to be painted. You just blend in with everything." George Ogilvy, who was the pastor, then walked through the back door, looked up, and he said, "Can I give you a suggestion?" And everybody said, "Okay, George, tell us what you want. You're the pastor. What have they got on the 10 Commandments and the Creed?" He said, "That's what I want to see up there." So we then met with a sign company, the Richmond Sign Company down on Main Street, and asked them, do you have anybody that can letter this? Because this is tedious work. and we met with them a couple of times. There was a gentleman down there, went and got some wood one day, got with George, and said, okay, I'm gonna print you what I think. He gave us 3 samples of what the lettering ought to look like. And he printed. George said, I like that one. And that's where we ended up with the panels. And they fit in beautifully with the colonial design. So, you know, everything had a meaning in here. And whether you realize it or not, during that period of time, the men I served with in the session and the men that were on that committee, this was really a very, what I want to call a deep Christian movement. There was a real devout feeling that God is guiding us. God knows what he wants in this church. And so that's how we ended up with an awful lot of things. Now, I probably skipped over a lot of things, because then we had to bring pews back in. Painting had to take place. I told Tommy the other day, there's one thing that I wanted, and I couldn't get it because we didn't have the money. And that the beading around, I wanted it done in gold leaf, and we couldn't afford to do it. And I would still love to see it, because if you took all of that, it would really bring this woodwork out. I have talked a lot, and I've skipped through a lot of things. The history of this church is unbelievable. And I really believe in my heart that Overbrook, from its very beginning, and before the 100 years ago that I did, but in the back of a room in a drugstore, has blessed this church in so many ways, with so many great pastors. And I've had the opportunity to serve with some of them, and have always felt I was blessed that in my career I was involved with this. There's not many things you do in your life that you feel God put his hands on your shoulder and said, do this. And I felt like it, that with myself and the committee, and I had a great committee, people who love this church, who have long since left, gone to glory. That love for this church shows when I walk in the sanctuary. So I'm going to shut up and I'll let you ask me questions. I hope I can answer them if you've got questions. Maybe I can. Marshall?
About how long did all this take?
Under a year.
Oh.
Under a year.
Under a year.
Now you're talking about this is a massive undertaking when you start tearing stuff out of here. But it was under a year that it was done.
Was he talking about the communion table and the baptism?
Oh yeah, let me tell you about the communion table. See that, I'm glad. All right, when this was finished and the platform was put in, the altar platform was put in, the old man who designed and built this up here stood in here, and the communion table was brought up among downstairs. He said, too small. He was a very gruff old man. And so the architect said, well, what? He said, I'll build you one. And that's the communion table you got right now. He went away, in 3 weeks came back with this. He said, this is what needs to be in here. It fits scale-wise, it fits with what you have here. So that's the story of the communion table. That's how I got here. This was built after that, and there's the old baptismal font, excuse me, is out in the front of this.
So it's made out of stone or marble, I think?
Yes, yeah, marble. That came from the old church.
Okay.
That came. This was built after that. In fact, the gentleman who did the pulpit set, he built this one. He was quite a craftsman. Yes, ma'am.
What approximate year was the pipe organ built?
I'm sorry.
What approximate year was the pipe organ built?
New?
What year was the pipe
Oh,
organ built?
I'd
It's
have to look.
1973.
73. Yeah, you
Thank you.
There, she was here with all
Yeah, I've been a member here since 19, And I have just a couple of memories I want to share. And one is the fact that there was no air conditioning in the building. I guess when we renovated, it was put in. But for a church service, all the windows and the doors would stay open. And when the music was played, it would go out and anybody outside the church could hear it, which it was super. It's a shame in a way that we sit here in comfort, but we're selfish in not sharing what we have. And the other thing is, I think I'm right, that your wedding was the last wedding that was held, starting here and walking all the way up to the pulpit.
It was the last one.
Yeah, I remember that. And one other thing, this is, I do tend to remember humor. The minister would be preaching, the pulpit was up there, and with all the windows and doors open, there would be flies. One time, sitting in the choir, we watched a bumblebee or such circling his head, and it's a little distracting, wondering if the minister was going to get attacked. Anyway,
Let me address it.
that was it. That's it.
Thank you, Betsy. Yes, ma'am.
I've got a question about the cupola. Is it empty on the inside, or how much do
Yes.
you think it weighs?
It's empty.
So it doesn't crash?
If it
on
were,
us?
I don't want to be sitting
It
under
is
it.
empty, okay.
I don't think he does either. Yes, sir.
Are those pews in that corner of the church in the same location as they were in the original configuration?
I can't hear you, I'm sorry.
Are these pews in their original
Yep.
position for when
No.
it was a center aisle
No.
church? No.
Well, they may have been. They've been shifted. It took a while to get the new layout made, so they're all, we were over, I think, Tommy, did you say 3 pews? We were over 2 or 3 pews when we started. We had not enough room to get them in. For a while, they sat out in the hallways and other places in the church.
Aren't the pews a different size now than they were then?
I'm sorry.
Are the pews a different size?
No.
No.
These are the original pews that were in here. We didn't add any, and we had to take, I think, 2 or 3 away. We didn't have. I'd like to stop and tell you a little story about when George passed away. It was a devastating time for this church. Those of us who were here, he was a beloved pastor, and everybody loved George. And he died in an automobile wreck. Most of you remember. We then had a time in there where we had supply pastors, but we had a minister with us who helped us out a lot. He was a chaplain at MCV, and we had Mary Jane Winters. How many of you all remember Mary Jane Winters?
She lives down the street from us now.
Oh, yeah. Mary Jane was a senior at the seminary, and she was a sweet girl and biblically very smart. Well, when we lost George, she couldn't, under Presbyterian rules, she couldn't take church over. So what do? Linton Ward, the session asked Linton Ward and I to get together with, I think it was called the Commission on Ministry at that time in the Presbytery, to try to find us a supply pastor. So we met with Dr. Shell Santana. I don't know if you ever knew Shell, pastor of Sandston, who was the chairman of it, and said, Shell, we got to find a pastor. This guy from the chaplaincy service, as busy as he can be down at MCV, we got to have a full-time pastor. Mary Jane is still in classes, and she's not able to be ordained. He made 3 phone calls. He came back, he said, I think I found you the minister. There's one little catch. And I said, okay, what's the catch? He said, number 1, he's Scottish. Okay, there's no catch there. He said, number two, he doesn't want to moderate the session. I said, well, right now, we're being moderated by a member of the session that's been elected. And so we can continue with that, I think. Now, you have to understand, when he came here, Ross, I met with him. And I was told by Shel Santana, he's the minister of flowing robes. He was ordained pastor at the Presbyterian Church. He was also a pastor of Lutheran Church. He was ordained, and he was ordained as a priest in the Episcopal Church, or the Church of England. Now, that didn't seem to bother the session, didn't bother the presbytery. We're going to be supplied by a minister who was ordained in three faiths. The only thing is that he's known as a pastor of flowing robes. I said, what do you mean by that? He said, he wears robes from all these different clergy groups that he belongs to. So you never know what Ross is going to show up at church. And that happened. I don't know if you remember, at times he wore different types of robes. The first Sunday he came here and I introduced him, he had on a white robe. And he looked very stately. He stood almost right here, put his hands up above this congregation and said, we're in the hands of God. We're going to be okay. And it was like he put a blessing with this place. And he was here for a right good while with us. And spoke with that brogue he had, and everybody fell in love with him. He was a great guy. But you never knew what he was going to show up in customers. It might be a black robe, and it may be something else, you just never knew. But he was known as the pastor of flowing robes. Yes, sir.
Is there steel coming out of the wall that supports the?
Yes.
Okay.
Don't worry.
Are you worried about it coming down on your
I
head?
don't want you coming back and suing me. What else have we got? I know I've skipped around and I've done a lot of. Dick, did I tell the truth? Where's Dick Beatles? Did I tell the truth? Dick was, at that time, you were a trustee, I think, in the church.
I was a lowly deacon,
Oh,
You were a lowly deacon at that time?
lowly deacon, and I qualified to be on the work detail hauling these pews.
You gotta remember, the Presbyterian, it wasn't, it's a few years after that when the church, I think it's after I left here, that they voted to change the structure and do away with what really was the Board of Deacons. See, there was a time when the Board of Deacons of the church really basically ran the church. The session was then basically on the spiritual life of the church. It didn't interfere itself in the financial side of the house. You remember that?
Yeah.
And then it joined, they all became one body. And at that time, the presbytery of the church was totally different. This is before your time. There was then known as the Southern Presbyterian and the Northern Presbyterian. How many of you all remember that? Betsy, you probably do. And at that point in time, I can't remember, I'd have to go through my notes, the General Assembly of both churches met in Atlanta, Georgia, and voted to come back together from the Southern to just the Presbyterian Church. That's what it joined. And with that, some structure within the officership changed too.
So in one flaw, in your beautiful church, Buzzy, that I love, but in that panel up there, how did you all let them capitalize Catholic Church?
I know.
We have even had members of the.
You can change, you can blame George because he didn't catch it.
That's wrong.
There are mistakes, and anytime you do a project like this, you make mistakes. And then you go back and look at it and say, I wish I hadn't done it this way. But in the end, I think this edifice was to the glory of God.
yes.
And it's withstood the.
So stepping back from where you started here, to now where we ended, and now you look back, what would you say would be the one or two things that you still scratch your head and say, wow, God,
What now?
what are, say, one or two things that took place which happened here in particular that you would say, God really ordained this.
That right there. That right there. Because we were at a loss, is what we were gonna do, we couldn't find somebody to build it and get it the way that the architect wanted it to look like. The other thing was structurally, going down to the basement and coming into this back hallway, all had to be structurally changed. And it was a trying time of whether we can structurally change it in the way it is now. But it had to be changed.
And that was the support, kind of this
Yeah,
level.
there was a lot of support under like steel beams up underneath all that. Because it had to be changed, or it didn't meet code. And a lot of things you do in things like this, as you go along, the counties and other things that you run across require that you change, because it doesn't meet code. Electrical system within this church. The dimmer system had to all be changed, because the original design electrically wasn't brought up to standards to where we are today. And I don't know whether they are even today. But the electrical system was all upgraded, and that was an expense we hadn't really incurred. That's why some of that $30,000 went towards electrical. We had electrical contractors, or we had contractors that would come in and volunteer their work in this church for nothing. They just want to be a part of it. Yes, ma'am.
I was told that with the C for capital C on Catholic, someone told me years ago that the person who did it donated his work, and therefore no one wanted to criticize him.
I'm sorry,
Is that-
you donated equipment.
I was told that the person who put this capital C on Catholic had donated his time, and no one wanted to criticize him. They wanted to appreciate his gift. I don't know if that's true.
Well, we paid to have it lettered.
That's not true.
All these years this office was leading. Keeping someone's feelings intact.
When I go back through my papers, I realize that there were so many things that were donated, because nobody had ever done this in a church in Richmond. And so it became, let us do this for you. We won't charge you for it. And we were fortunate with Davidson Spires, that they were willing to let other contractors come in and do small things. Yeah, Joy.
I had to put a personal touch on this. This was a very trying decision that they made, because they really turned everything around. And there was a lot of prayerfulness going on among other people. Everybody didn't agree with this. And I do remember the struggle or the worry that the committee had. And I remember the night that Buzzy came home, and almost in tears. And I thought, oh gosh, what's happened now? And he said, he said, the Lord was with us tonight, and the Lord helped make the decision. And that's when it all started then to start. Yeah, I mean, I think the Lord really did have his hand in doing this whole project.
Can I tell a little story about what she said, and then I'll come back with you? I don't know why. We were meeting that night, and several members of the committee really were on the line whether we wanted to do this. It was a lot of money, and you got to have full committee behind this. If you're going to go to the congregation and ask them for this money, and you're going to redo their sanctuary, you need to have a full committee. I don't know why. I came in the church that night, and I went and found a hymn, and I've used it more than once. I hear you calling, Lord. I've called pastors with that. I came into the meeting and I said to myself, I handed each member a hymn book, and I said, read the words of this, and then we'll pray. I hear you calling, Lord. I hear you. It was unanimous. Excuse me. I am not forgotten that night. was a great night. Because we came together. The Lord brought us together, and we did this. Yes, ma'am. I'm sorry, I get a little emotional when I think back.
No, since you've alluded to some of the, I use the word contention for lack of a better English word, that occurred. When you're doing a project this large, there's always a difference of opinions. Is there, and that's being polite about it, yeah. And usually these differences are expressed quite vividly. Do you have any concept, or does anyone have any concept of, was there a group of members that just abandoned the ship?
No.
Okay.
No. I don't remember anybody leaving it. And Javon, do you remember anybody walking out upset about the club? No.
Okay, I was just curious.
The first Sunday here, it came together. They walked in here and were amazed what this place looked like.
Okay.
It was wonderful to see the faces of people instead of everybody's back.
We had met downstairs and that wasn't very conducive.
One of the things too, Buzzy, all of us had to be voted on by the congregation.
That's right.
At the time. During congregational meetings, yes, it was contentious. I mean, people, each individual part was basically voted on. And we would have a vote for something, I'd vote in favor and Brendan vote against it. Or the next thing would come up and she'd vote for it, and I'd vote against it. So there was a lot of that to begin with.
And we still went home together. We didn't abandon that ship either.
I mean, like, for example, Brenda voted against removing the center aisle. She was a bride. She didn't want to
Yeah,
get rid of
that's
that
right.
center
That
aisle.
was one of the contentious things.
But,
The center aisle.
that's right. So,
Yeah.
I think
It was a marvelous time with the Lord working in this church. And if you go back and read the history of this church and where it all started in the back of that meeting room, and where we are today,
Okay,
the Lord's been here.
could you repeat, because I am not familiar, I have not been a part of this church that long. Where was that back of the bakery where it started?
It was the back of a drugstore in Barton Heights.
In Barton Heights, okay.
Over by the seminary.
Okay, yeah, I know where Barton Heights
That's
is.
where
I
it's-
didn't catch that part of
There
it.
were about half a dozen people met back there and decided that I started church.
Yeah, it started as a Sunday school class
Okay.
on
Patty,
the
you
second
had a
floor of
question?
Brady's.
And River Park Boulevard.
What about all the molding around the ceiling?
That was there. That did not change.
That was original.
That was part of the original, yeah.
Okay, so our external walls and the shape didn't change. The
You
only,
couldn't.
what changed was the
Structurally, you could
configuration.
not change it, no. We went to the pods, what we did to try to get, and there was no way you could get it into a circular motion in here.
I have a movie of the steeple being put on top.
Oh.
Now, I wasn't a member here then, but you gotta remember this whole area of Richmond was really developing then. I mean, it was growing up here.
And Steve Cooper running across the grass out here as they were putting the steeple.
Yeah, I mean, this whole area, the Baptist church down the street, it was growing like crazy. All the churches, because people were moving out of the city and into the suburbs, excuse me. That's it.
You know, the Sunday school wing was not part of the original building. And the back door to get into the church from the parking lot was about where these steps are that come into the back foyer. And the secretary had an office right there.
George's office was
And
right there where
the
Steve's
upstairs-
is.
There were stairs upstairs, and that was used, I almost want to say the minister was up there. I'm not sure where that office was, but, and I
There was no
don't
steeple.
remember
She
when
said there was no
wing
steeple.
was added. When was that wing added?
added the steeples in church. Before I came here, it was put on. There was, the educational building was added, air conditioning was put in the
59 they put the
sanctuary.
steeple on.
Hmm?
55, they put the wing on. The cornerstone is still there for that. I think it was 59 when they put the steeple on.
This church has been blessed in so many ways, with superior pastors, men who led the flock, as I call it, and people who gave for themselves. Most of those people that I served with back then are no longer with us. And there's times I think about them. They were great Christian gentlemen. And the women, no disrespect to it, there was, at that point, there was no women in the officership of the church. But women served on these committees quietly and guided their husbands. What they wanted. Kurt?
Just a quick story, when Kelly and I joined the church in the late 80s, we would sit over in this section here, Dot and Linton Ward, we're still alive and we're sitting there. And I can still see Linton, he had this little black notebook he'd take out of his pocket, and he'd write something down every Sunday, put it back in. And I knew Linton, you know, we got to know each other. I really enjoyed the, you know, the men and just the leadership, and, you know, but, so one day I was talking to Linton, I said, Linton, what are you writing down every day? And he took out his book and he showed me, and he said, do you know how many stops were used on the organ that day? And he said, you know how many were used last week? And then he said it was funny, because one, he said, she missed this one though 2 weeks ago. She missed it. But that was so, but he was so just genuine, and that was so near and dear to his heart. And it's like you would describe kind of the glory that brought to God through that music, through that organ. But it was so funny when he said, he said, how many years you want to go back? I can show you how many stops we use each Sunday. So thank you.
You think he
Well,
was
one thing
bad
he
with
wanted,
that?
which all
He
of us
was
wanted.
he was my executive officer of the Naval Reserve Training Center. You think he was bad with that?
He wanted that bass chamber so bad, and we didn't have enough room for it, didn't have the money. That was one of the things that he wanted.
Well, Buzzy, I'd like to just bring forth that we've always been an innovative church, open to new ideas. We are continuing that. You would enjoy seeing the way we now collect communion. We have all of the young people in the church go around and take the envelopes and any other contributions that are being made and bring them to the front and put them in. And it provides maybe not as much spiritualism as it does just a high regard for doing something different and including the children.
It's amazing, let's take it. I'm gonna close, if there's any more questions. Dick, did I tell any wild ones?
Good job, Buzzy.
Okay.
I wanted to ask about the basement and about the kitchen in the basement. I've used it some, we don't use as much as we did, but is it true that Mrs. Louise Throckmorton, women designed the kitchen downstairs?
Yes.
Is that
Yes.
true? All right, okay. That was a tremendous feat to have been done and to have Mr. Bill Cooper approve that.
Yeah, but he changed it.
I'm sure he did.
Bill and I many times did not agree on things, but he was a heck of a good engineer, I want to thank you all. I'm going to talk about me for a minute and my belief in God and where I've come. I came out of the Army, Joe and I were married, we lost 2 children, and we've been fortunate enough to have 3 living children, and very proud of them. And 8 grandchildren? I think that's how many we got, and 1 great-grandchild. In my career, by whatever, I don't quite understand where God was leading me. I came to the Commonwealth of Virginia under 3 governors. I was blessed to become the administrator of the community college system and was involved in building a lot of the colleges across the state. During that time, I felt like this church was with me all the way. And I had the great support of my super wife back there, who I wouldn't be here today if it hadn't been for her. We've walked many a trail, and this church has walked a lot of trails, but God has always been with us. And I feel in my career, over the years, I've gone from this to this to this to this, always wondering, where is God taking me here? What am I doing? This church has a tremendous warm place in my heart, because this is part of my career, was this church and what took place here, with a lot of wonderful people that stood behind us and built this wonderful church. And it's still God's blessing. Thank you very much for having me here.
We would like to thank you on behalf of the people from Overbrook that are here today. We'd like
Well,
to
thank you.
give you a thank you and just say, I know you blessed us all today. We really appreciate you taking your time and coming to speak to us
Thank you.
today. Thank you so much.
I missed a lot of things, but I wish I could remember.
What does that say? You've forgotten more than I ever knew, so there you go.
Close for us, Pastor.
Could I close us in a word of prayer? Let's pray. Lord, again, we give you thanks. We've been reminded today of, yes, things that people in this church have done, but I thank you that Mr. Kilgore has really pointed out, above all, your faithfulness in the life of this church. How you enabled the people here to accomplish even what they weren't sure could be accomplished. And because of that, when the people who were here and experienced it walk into this sanctuary, just as those of us who are the newcomers walk into this sanctuary, we are overwhelmed with the reality of the presence of God. And for the people's faithfulness who went through the meetings and the challenges and could have given up along the way, but didn't, because they trusted in you. They trusted that you were calling them and that you were leading them to accomplish something wonderful in your name. Lord, we give you thanks. And may we who are here today, who stand on their shoulders, Lord, may we be empowered with that same faithfulness in your leadership and in your provision. And to this, all of God's people said in Jesus' name, amen. Amen. Thank you.
Thank you, Pastor. Thank you all for listening to it all, man.